Welcome to another Energy Media Expert interview. And today we're going to be talking to Brian Livingston, who's a fellow at the School of Public Policy and also with the C.D. Howe Institute. And we're going to be talking about Enbridge's plan to change the way it apportions crude oil on its mainline pipeline, which takes out which provides egress for most of the oil that's produced in Western Canada. So, Brian, welcome to the interview.
Happy to be here.
So let's start with maybe an overview of this issue, if you don't mind. It's not a simple one, is my reading of it.
I guess the simplest way I would say this is yet another symptom of the fact that the amount of what they call export capacity from Alberta is less than what the production from the producing fields in Alberta is. And we've all heard about curtailment. We've heard about what they call apportionment, which is where they basically reduce the amount that you can ship. And we've also heard about rail transport. The Enbridge Mainline is the largest single pipeline out of Alberta. It handles about 70% of Alberta's heavy oil exports. That's about 2.8 million barrels a day, which is a lot of oil. It goes many places. It will go as far as Sarnia in Ontario. It will go down into the Midwest in the United States. And it basically delivers crude oil either to refineries who actually use it to refine or to other pipelines so it can in turn be shipped further down, sometimes as far as the Gulf Coast, which is in Houston. So right now, they have what they call a common carrier or uncommitted capacity. And that's, in essence, what I call the walk-up market. It's like you and I, if we were booking airline tickets on WestJet or Air Canada, we'd walk up to and say, we'd like to buy a ticket, and we buy one. We don't have to commit for any length of time. We just decide to buy a ticket. That's the way it is now. Unfortunately, the amount of capacity is not big enough to take all of the shipments out of Alberta. So they've been apportioning, and that means that if somebody says, I have 140 barrels per day to ship, they can only ship 100. So only 100 goes, and the 40 is apportioned out, as they call it, on a pro rata basis. And that affects each and every shipper. Enbridge is proposing in its proposal to go to what they call a contract carrier basis. And that means that you basically commit for a long period of time. It could be as many as 8, could be as many as 20 years to ship so many barrels a day for the next 8 or 20 years. It would be like saying to Air Canada or WestJet, I commit to buy so many tickets for the next 8 or 10 or 20 years. So it's very different. Some people are prepared to do that, particularly refiners in the United States who know they've got a refinery to run, who know they need crude oil, heavy oil from Alberta to process. So they're prepared to do that for 8 or 20 years. Some of the other shippers here in Alberta are not as regular, as I call it. In other words, they might produce a lot this month, not so much next month, and maybe even nothing the month after. So they're reluctant to commit. They like the uncommitted or common carrier, as it's called.
Now, Brian, a number of the big producers have submitted letters to the National Energy Board, now the Canadian Energy Regulator, opposing Enbridge's move. And we see Suncor, the integrated producer, we see CNRL, the unintegrated producer. Both of them have complaints about this. And why is it that the big companies, which normally get their way in a lot of times, are objecting so strenuously?
Well, I think I've read through the Suncor and the CNRL and some other submissions to the CER. They're all online on the CER website. And Suncor's and CNRL's basic complaint, if you will, is that Enbridge is putting the cart before the horse. In other words, Enbridge is saying, you, Suncor, you, CNRL, you, MEG, you, Baytex, any one of you producers, if you want to ship on our pipeline, you're going to have to irrevocably, and that's a nice legal word, we mean you really mean it, you can't get it back, irrevocably commit to ship for somewhere between 8 and 20 years. And that's before you even know if the CER, as you mentioned, if the CER is going to approve this change to contract carriers. In other words, as a kid, I used to say, never open your mouth and close your eyes at the same time, because somebody will put something in your mouth. And in essence, the Suncors and the CNRLs are saying, we're not prepared and should not be required to irrevocably commit to you, Enbridge, unless and until we know that the CER is in agreement with your proposal to change to a 90% contract carrier.
Now, what is it that I know I read CNRL's letter, for instance, and what they're worried about is the integrated carriers, or one of their concerns anyway, is that the integrated carriers will use the air barrels to nominate more barrels, or they'll ship barrels and they actually ship less barrels, fewer barrels than they actually have, kind of the air barrel idea. and that works against CNRL's interest. Have I got that right?
Yeah, the air barrels is a term that is used. That means if you, let's say you want to ship 100 barrels a day, and you know that you're going to be prorated 40%. So you say, well, I'm going to nominate 140 barrels a day. 100 of those are real barrels. The other 40 are, as you call them, air barrels. And I know I'll be prorated, so I'll get prorated down from 140 down to 100. And that's all I really wanted in the first place. So that's what a lot of companies were doing. And it got to be basically a games playing situation. And it's been called dysfunctional. It's been called many things. That's what some of the larger producers will do. The smaller producers are worried that if they don't commit, they'll basically be only able to ship on the 10% that's remaining, that's uncommitted, and there'll be a large number of barrels per day chasing a very small capacity, namely the remaining 10%, and they'll get prorated a huge amount, whereas the integrated shippers, the refiners, as you mentioned, will having contracted, will always get what they've contracted for and won't be prorated again.
Well, let's talk about the small producers, because a lot of them are in tough shape. They never recovered. Their balance sheets have not recovered from downturn in 2015 and 2016. And my understanding is that in order to undertake a long-term contract like this, the producers need to have a solid balance sheet, and that would seem to favor the big guys versus the little guys. Is there any concern that the small players won't even have the credit capacity in order to enter into a contract?
Short answer is yes. You're absolutely right. When you commit, say, for 15 years to ship so many thousand barrels a day, that is shown as an unconditional obligation. And I won't bore you with too much of the accounting, but it's shown in the financial notes to the financial statements. It could be many, many hundreds of millions and even billions of dollars. When CNRL put their submission in, they said, it could be for us as much as high as $20 billion spread out over a number of years. So the larger companies probably can do it. The smaller companies, they just might not have the financial capacity to do it.
Now, walk us through the next steps, because the Enbridge had announced back in, I think it was August, that there was going to be an open season. So basically, the companies were asked to step up and commit to X number of barrels per day. And the CER stepped in and said, you have to suspend that until we approve it. And what's the next step?
Well, that's a very good question. Enbridge has said we are going to go to the CER and ask for the same contract, 90% contract capacity argument or proposal that we did in the open season. The difference will be that they will not have any irrevocably committed bids or agreements to ship for people who are waiting and seeing. They want to see what the CER reaction is going to be. So they may get some from some of the integrated refiners, the ones in the Gulf Coast and in what they call the Midwest of the United States, in places like Joliet and Illinois. But they probably won't get any commitments frankly, from the Suncor, Shells, and CNRLs, and a number of other producers, because those producers want to wait and see. And so you're going to see a hearing in which a lot of people have different views, and it will make for a very interesting, it will be, put it this way, it will be good theater, is the way I would put it. And there will be many, many, many lawyers there representing each of their various clients, and there will be a number of clients. And not all clients, even the people on the producing side, may not have exactly the same interest with each other. So it's going to be, I won't call it a free-for-all, but it'll be an interesting exchange of views.
Well, now that we've got a shortage of pipeline capacity out of Alberta, and the current agreements or the current arrangement expires in mid-2020, is this a case of Enbridge flexing its market muscle? It's got an advantage in the market right now, and is prepared to take advantage of it. Is that what this is about?
Well, and certainly that's what the producers argued in their submissions. That's what Suncor argued. That's what CNRL argued. And they said, listen, you're doing this, Enbridge, when you basically got us over a barrel, no pun intended. In other words, you have got the market ability to say, sign or die. That's the actual, I'm not making that up. That was the expression that a number of producers used. They said, you're forcing us to either sign or die. We have to sign and commit to capacity that we may or may not be able to afford, that we may or may not want. But if we don't, we'll die because we won't have any capacity except that little bit of 10% on uncommitted. So a lot of the producers were saying that, and that will be, I'm sure that's what they will say at the upcoming CER hearing.
Are there any other consequences for the producers that we haven't talked about yet?
No, just going back to your previous question, as far as Enbridge is concerned, I think their concern is they want to have committed capacity for the next 8, 10, 20 years because they're not sure what pipelines are going to be like 10 years from now. I mean, Trans Mountain Pipeline may or may not get built. If it does get built, that may take away some of the volumes, and Enbridge may be what they call the flywheel shipper, which means in English, it means that they're the ones that whose amount of shipment gets reduced because people are shipping on Trans Mountain or some other pipeline. And frankly, there may be reduced demand for hydrocarbons because, I mean, we all saw last Friday, we saw people marching in the streets saying reduce greenhouse gas emissions. If all of that occurs, okay, you all of a sudden may get to a situation where the Enbridge line is undersubscribed as opposed to oversubscribed. But right now, the producers were saying, look, we're being forced to do this. The CER said, we don't like the fact, Enbridge, that you appear to have market power to force people to do this, and that's why we, the CER, told you to stop this open season.
Brian, that's a very interesting point from my point of view. I've argued in columns that what we can expect in global markets going forward is volatility and uncertainty, which then brings into the discussion the issue of risk management. So is it fair to say, it sounds like it from what you've just said, that this in fact is largely driven by Enbridge's risk management strategy because of the uncertainty going forward over the next, say, 5-10 years?
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think that is one of Enbridge's goals, is to shift the risk of what I call pipeline shortfalls, mainline pipeline shipping shortfalls, which right now they're oversubscribed, but things change and they may be undersubscribed 10 years from now. And they're saying we want to shift that risk to the shippers. And if the shippers are people who are refineries in the United States, well, then so be it.
Brian, thank you very much. No doubt we'll be reconvening in a few months to talk about whatever the CER decides. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to chatting with you again.
Good to be with you. Thanks again.